Hi friends! I don't want to be on camera again today, so I'm just going to obnoxiously fiddle with some paint while I talk to you. These are the colors I'll be using for the project today. They are all Waverly chalk paints. We have Lagoon, Pumpkin, Maze, Night Sky, which is a new one, Crimson and White, as well as a little bit of ink, which is the black, which is off camera. Anyhow, today I decided to make a little retro rocket. I found a raw wood rocket at Walmart and it inspired me to make something. So without further yip yapping and obnoxious paint waving, let's see what kind of talent I wasted today. So here is my little rocket from Wally World. And I made a bunch of resin pieces like this to cover the holes on the rocket. And for the middle window, I'm using this Christmas ornament. I'm just scoring the little top part so I can remove it. And I'm going to snap it off with some pliers because I couldn't cut all the way through it with the X-Acto knife. And I'll just give it a little quick sand so that the nub isn't scratchy. This box I got at Target. From the dollar spot, I believe. I think it had a smaller one inside it. I could be completely wrong, so don't quote me on that, but I got the box from somewhere and I feel like it might have been Target. Now I measured out to make sure my rocket was in the center, and I'm going to trace it so that I know where my rocket needs to go later. And in order to get a hole in the back of the box where the switch will be, I am going to run my pencil over the rocket here to make a template so I can see exactly where the hole is. I'm just going to run a marker over it just to make it a little bit more obvious. After I cut this out, I can line it up with the rocket I traced onto the box. And then I'm able to mark where my circle needs to go. Now at first I thought I was going to cut through this with an X-Acto knife, but then I realized that's like impossible and would take forever, and I'd probably slip and cut myself. So instead I'm going to drill a bunch of holes all the way around the circle using this little hand drill. And then I can use the X-Acto knife to connect those holes, and that will help me more easily remove this piece without power tools. And after I pop that out, I'm just going to give it a quick sanding. Now this I got in a mystery box. I have a video of me opening that if you're interested. And this is meant to be an iron-on patch, but you can use the gems individually, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm just going to use some super glue, which I got at Dollar Tree, to glue the little gems on over the holes that are in the rocket, and then also a few more in some other places where I thought rivets would look good. And I'm going to remove this little nub at the bottom as well. So I'm going to be putting some flames coming out of the rocket, so I want the bottom to be flat. So to get the flames in the box where they'll fit nicely, I'm just dry fitting the rocket in there and drawing out my flame shape. That way I know it's not going to touch the bottom of the box or not fit in there. And just to make it perfectly symmetrical, I'm going to cut that shape I just drew in half. Not cut it in half, fold it in half, and trace out what I want, and then cut it out. And then I have a template for later, which we'll go back to. Now I want to seal the edges of this rocket in, so I'm just measuring how wide it is, and I cut some strips of paper to that size, and I'm gluing them on. Before I enclose it entirely though, I realized that I need to diffuse the light inside a little bit more, so I'm just taking some wood glue and gluing some vellum paper on the inside to cover up the holes, so that'll help diffuse the light. And then I'm also using the wood glue to glue that paper onto the sides. Now I'm going to use some acrylic gesso to coat everything so that my paint will stick properly and it also won't soak into the wood and waste paint. And I'm going to gesso the box as well as the rocket. Now that that's done, I can plan out my rocket design, which I actually already did off camera, so I'm just kind of pantomiming, is that the word? Here to show you where I'm going to be putting my design. And then I wanted to also have an edge on this middle part here, so I'm just measuring out roughly the length and width of that, and I'm going to cut a piece of paper to that size. And then I get to use my cool new tool, which I think is called a corner punch, that I got on Amazon, to round all the edges perfectly. And then I will have this little rounded square that I can use as a template on my rocket. I wanted to do that to make sure that this square was really symmetrical, because the way that I glued the rivets on was kind of crooked and I didn't want to go by that. And now I'm going to paint my design on the rocket. I'm going to use the crimson and the lagoon for the rocket. And for the background, I'm using the night sky color. I'm going to take these bamboo sticks I got on Amazon to make a frame around the box. So I'm just marking how long they need to be and trimming off the excess. Then I'm going to use my miter shears at a 45-degree angle to cut the ends of the sticks so that they fit together like a frame. And I'm just dry fitting here to make sure that they were cut correctly. I'll set those aside for later. And I am going in with some white Waverly paint on the white gesso just to clean up the edges and make the color nice and bright. And here I'm mixing up some 2-part epoxy. It's the Gorilla Glue 5-minute epoxy, and I'm going to use that to attach the resin pieces and the dome for the middle window. Now here I decided, instead of printing out a retro atomic 50s pattern or trying to find a scrapbook paper that had that pattern, that I was going to make my own retro 50s atomic pattern. And I'm doing that with this stamp making kit. The other reason I'm doing that is I got this kit in a, a art subscription box a while back, and I never used it, so I figured this was an excuse to go ahead and use the kit. So you just carve out from this block that they provide you with the special tools, you carve your shapes out. And I decided to do just a couple of different random sort of 50s shapes. one of which I don't end up using. The one that's filled in entirely black, the like 4-pointed star shape, I don't end up using. And this is not a tutorial on stamp making, but I did just want to show you kind of a little bit of the process. So this is the ink that came with the kit, and I'm just using it to test the stamps before I use them on the rocket, just to make sure that they're how I want them to look. And you can see there's little bits off of the shape that are like black where it shouldn't be, so that way I know that needs to be carved down before I continue. Now that I have them all done, I'm using my chalk paints to go ahead and stamp onto the sides of the box. And I'm using the colors we've seen already so far, plus the maize, which is the yellow color. Now, as you can see, these don't stamp perfectly, so I do go in after with a paintbrush and fill in all the shapes to make sure that they're completely solid. While that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and mix up some epoxy sculpt. Epoxy sculpt is basically like an air dry clay, but it's a 2-part one. You have to mix part A and B for it to harden. And I'm just going to roll out snakes of clay and use them to seal our little bubbles onto our rocket. I thought this would make them look more like they're a part of the rocket, and it should hopefully help to keep them on there permanently as well. So I put them on, trim them to size, and then I'm using a silicone sculpting tool to blend the edges in. I'm also going to use the epoxy sculpt to make our flames for the rocket as well. So I'm just rolling that out to the correct size for the template that we made. And then I will use it to cut out the shape. And I do want to make this a 3-layer flame, so once I cut out my biggest flame, I'm using a pencil to draw on our pattern so I can make it a little bit smaller than it is now. So I'm just getting a basic idea of where I want it to go, and then I'm cutting out the excess. And then we would just repeat the same process as before, cutting it out of the clay. And we can attach that on top of our other one. And this is why you don't buy cheap tools on Amazon. And then I'll do that with a 3rd layer as well. Now that this is dry, I can go in with my paints. So for the bottom of the flames, I'm going to use the crimson. Then for the middle, I'm using pumpkin, which is the orange, and then the maize yellow. I'm also going to take that maize yellow and paint all of our epoxy window frames, I guess you could call them. And this is messy. I did have to go back in after and do touch-ups with the red and blue paints to hide the mess that I made. And I used a baby wipe to wipe the paint off of the resin pieces before it dried. So now I am putting some stars in our background using a dotting tool. And I'm going to alternate between the orange, yellow, and white chalk paints. And I do also alternate 2 different sizes of dotting tools. Now I'm taking a white gel pen. This is a Uniball Posca. Is that what it is? Oh my god, it's been so long since I've used it. It's a Uniball something. But anyway, I'm just making some star shapes, like some crosses and X's to indicate stars in the sky. And now I'm taking a black paint marker. That's what it's called. Black paint marker. This one is by Artistro. And I'm just gonna put on some black lines onto our designs on the side, just to make it look more atomic 50s style. And then as a last touch, I'm going to add some dots to this pattern with the pumpkin or orange chalk paint. Everything is now dry, so I'm going to go ahead and glue my rocket in place using E6000 glue. And we just want to make sure we put some weight on there so that it won't move, and to make sure that the glue is touching the bottom so that it's got a good adhesion. And we'll do the same with our flames. Now I'm taking the E6000 and I'm going to attach our frame. If you have a good eye, you might have noticed at one point these frame pieces were yellow, but I decided I didn't like that, so I repainted them blue. Now I'm making a sign for the top of our box. I want this to look like a toy box. So I designed a sign off camera on some just regular copy paper, and I'm cutting it out of different types of chipboard. I don't know what the thickness is on this chipboard, but it's pretty thick. I have to run the knife over it at least 10 times to get it to separate. So I'm using that really thick chipboard for this first piece of the sign. And then I'm switching to a thinner chipboard for this other piece. This is probably the consistency of like a cereal box, maybe a little bit thicker than a cereal box. But this one is a lot easier to cut. I can actually cut it with a pair of scissors. Now on my Cricut, I cut out some balsa wood letters. I could have cut them out of chipboard as well, but for some reason I just did the wood. I had it on hand, so I don't know, I just popped it in the Cricut. But anyways, I want to use this atomic as a template to put my letters down in the right place, so I'm just trimming the extra wood off so that I can put that template down easily and be able to see where I'm laying the letters. And I'm using wood glue to adhere this. So I'll just pop that in there and put the letters down. Now this didn't work exactly out to plan because they do move when I lift up the outer edge there. But luckily I was smart enough to have traced the atomic with a pencil first before I did anything, so I'm able to adjust them back into the spot they need to be. Now for these letters, I don't have a template background. I'm just putting them on by eye. When I printed them on the Cricut, I just did them like to fit on the piece of balsa wood that I had. I did not print them out in order because the piece would have been too long to fit on the piece of balsa wood that I had. But I'm just lining them up and trying to space them as evenly as I can by eyeball. And once I have my sign lined up where I like it, I'm going to make some marks on the back with a pencil so I know where to put glue. That way I don't have just a bunch of excess glue in a bunch of places that I don't need it. Sometimes your finger's just easier. Now that everything is together where I want it, I'm going to go over the whole thing with some watered down wood glue. This will make sure that my letters are nice and stuck on there and aren't going to go anywhere. And it also will seal in the chipboard, which is essentially just cardboard. That way that when I go to paint it, all of my paint doesn't just get sucked up into the cardboard. I also cut some other pieces out with my Cricut, so I'm just painting those. And here is where everything goes wrong. I decided I was going to put this black border on the rocket because a lot of the 1950s toys that I was looking at online had this black outline, but instead of doing it the right way, which would have been to use a very thin paintbrush and a lot of patience, I decided to try to use my paint marker, and the lines were way too thick and not as neat as I wanted them to be. But I was committed to this idea, so I went ahead and did the entire rocket anyway. And now I am going to paint my sign. I'm going to use the Lagoon color for our background bean shape where it says atomic. While that's drying, I cut out some letters and some stars on my Cricut. So I am just going to turn those little shapes I painted into some little signs. Now for the stars and the moon that I cut out, those are for the background and the sides of the box. I would not be able to draw perfect 5-point stars, so I figured I would use my Cricut for that. And I'm mixing up a little bit of white and black for the stars. And then I'm going to go back to my sign and paint the moon rocket part in the crimson red. I attached another vinyl I cut out onto the back. And I'm going to cover up the bad edge on this with some cardboard. I used my die cut machine to cut out the shape that I wanted. And I'm going to paint that red. And you'll see in a second that I decided to change that arrow a little bit. I cut the end of it off. And then I'm going to attach this ring that I made with some wood glue. And again, go over the top with watered down wood glue to make sure it doesn't move. Now, I was originally going to make moon rocket black, but I decided I don't like that. So you can just ignore that M is black for the moment. And I am going to color the atomic in black. At first, I did go ahead and use my paint markers for this process, but it turned out to be very patchy and uneven. So after I put one first initial coat on with the paint markers, I am going to go back in and use chalk paint instead. Oh, and then a magic sandwich appeared. Oh, it's gone again. Gotta grab those magic sandwiches quick before they disappear. And then to protect everything and make sure my vinyl stays on, because it is removable vinyl, not permanent, I am going to go over the entire thing with some matte Mod Podge. And then the areas that are large enough for me to use the brayer, I'm going to do that so that I don't have lines like brush marks in my Mod Podge. For the sign on the top, I'm going to use E6000. And I'm just making these little bump outs on each corner with some of the thinner chipboard so that the sign will lay flat when I glue it down. And my little light up sign thing, I'm going to stick to the bottom corner there. And then as a last step, I'm going to use super glossy Mod Podge on top of our little windows here. I Mod Podged everything except for them, and I'm going to use a different Mod Podge so they stay shiny. The window in the center, I'm not going to Mod Podge at all because it's nice and shiny. I don't think it needs anything on it. Alright, so that is my retro 50s atomic inspired light up rocket thingamajingy-mabob. I have some regrets. I wish I hadn't done the black lines. I wish I had put an astronaut or something in the little window there. And I wish I had covered this with plastic, so it was more like a toy box. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I feel like that would have looked cute and also would have kept the dust out. But this was an experiment. I made it up as I went along, so I think it came out pretty good anyway. If I ever make another one, I'll keep all of those things in mind for the next time. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Give me some comments down below. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you like these black lines or not. And I'll see you next time to waste some more talent. Bye!